I have never seen anyone demonstrate that Rushdoony or Bahnsen wanted to take the Mosaic law and just overlay it on top of ours. I don't believe they thought that.
I don't think they did either, but that's the accusation.
It is the accusation. I have literally heard Rushdoony, because I've listened to way more of his lectures than I have with Bahnsen, but Rushdoony multiple times in his lectures have said that's insanity. You can't do that. It's not possible. Hey friends, this is Snake on the Table. I'm Tanner Cartwright here with Jerry Dorris, where we take the questions that the school marms are made uncomfortable by and we deal with them.
Yeah.
So what's our question today?
Today's question is, what is your view of general equity theonomy? And I think this has come up because you have said it in the past that you hold to that. Now, I would just go on record. I've never called myself a theonomist.
You have not.
I've never liked the term general equity theonomy. I just don't like it because it carries a lot of baggage with it. And you've been okay with that phrase.
Yep.
And then we've both been okay being called Christian nationalists.
Yep.
I'm totally cool with that. Although that freaks a lot of people out in different circles. Depends on where you're at on these kind of things.
I cannot for the life of me figure out why, but it
well,
does.
and my thought on this whole topic is that this is a third tier issue.
Sure.
But the reason this is an issue is because it's cast by some as being a confessional issue, that if you add theonomy to general equity,
that you destroy it.
Well, that you're denying. Because theonomy, the way it's characterized, has been a denial of certain aspects of our confession, the Westminster as well.
Sure.
And so those that have held to theonomy have been, they've been said you're not confessional.
You're talking about men like Reconstructionists, Gary North, Bahnsen, Rushdoony.
So on that scale, like we would say Bahnsen and Rushdoony specifically, I haven't looked at Gary North stuff, but the other two I have. And Bahnsen, he would reject any thought that he wasn't confessional, and he's tried to defend himself against that charge.
So would Rushdoony.
Well, Rushdoony was less careful. He didn't care.
Yeah, well, that's true.
He just really didn't care what
what
people were saying about him, whereas Bahnsen did.
He was more articulate than Rushdoony, for sure.
Yeah. But you've even said recently to me that maybe you're not even comfortable with the phrase theonomist anymore. Or any of that.
I'm not made uncomfortable by the term. The term doesn't bother me. So general equity theonomy. Here's what's happened. I've come into the view of theonomy or general equity and these kind of things of how a civil government should operate, how we should construct laws. I'm coming at it within the last 10, 15 years. Like, I was introduced to these things before I even knew who David Bahnsen, or not David, that's his son, but Greg Bahnsen or Rushdoony or any of these guys were. And so I'm coming into it.
You mean conceptually, or you mean actually the phraseology?
The phraseology and the idea. Yeah, the idea of theonomy. I was introduced to the idea before those guys. So I had
before you'd read them.
I had the idea of theonomy introduced to me before Reconstructionism.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I'm not getting it from those guys necessarily. But then I did start listening to those guys on the recommendation of guys like Jeff Durbin and whatnot. And so I started listening to lectures of Rushdoony, read several of Bahnsen's books, found them compelling, obviously disagreed with them on several
recent.
things.
That's probably within the last
5-6 years.
Yeah, or less, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I read Bahnsen's book. It's been several years since I read it. But regardless. So from all that, I've been completely comfortable calling myself a general equity theonomist based on my understanding of theonomy, which is just God's law. We should base our laws off of God's law. And so here's what the accusation is, or the concern is, that if we're holding to theonomy, we're holding to what Greg Bahnsen taught.
Or more specifically, Rushdoony. Yeah.
Well, I think
there's a scale.
So I think a lot of guys would argue that Bahnsen owns the word because he wrote a book and he defined theonomy in that book. Like, he gave a very clear, articulated, thorough definition. And so because of that, they say, well, then if you say theonomy, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that has not been the case. Theonomy, I've just taken it at face value. It means God's law. So general equity, theonomy, in my mind, is just the general equity of God's law applied to our laws in today, the civil sphere. And so that's been my view. I have never seen anyone demonstrate that Rushdoony or Bahnsen wanted to take the Mosaic law and just overlay it on top of ours. I don't believe they thought that.
I don't think they did either, but that's the accusation.
It is the accusation. I have literally heard Rushdoony, because I've listened to way more of his lectures than I have with Bahnsen, but Rushdoony multiple times in his lectures have said that's insanity. You can't do that. It's not possible. It wouldn't even be just.
Right.
And so I've never seen it proven conclusively that what they accuse these guys of believing is even what they believed.
Yeah.
But regardless, I think I frankly find it kind of ridiculous that we want to say, well, this guy now owns the definition. In my mind, it would be like if a prominent amillennialist wrote a book on amillennialism, but from a historicist view, that now I can't use the term amillennialism because I'm a preterist.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I don't have a problem with the term theonomy, general equity theonomy. I don't really call myself that anymore.
Why not?
Well, because I think, frankly, the best argument against theonomy is modern theonomists, because they remind me of biblicists. So it's like, if it's not there was a guy on Twitter just the other day, or X, that was saying, if there's not a law against it in the Old Testament, then we can't criminalize it because that's tyranny.
Yeah.
Well, it's the dumbest thing anyone's ever said. And, it was just crazy. Yeah. Because then you can't criminalize pornography. There's a myriad, and I gave him a list of things that you can't criminalize that we all would agree need to be criminalized.
Yeah.
So I think that we should, I believe that what the 1689 says, that we should look at the general equity of the judicial law of the Old Testament and apply it today and figure out how to make just laws based off of that in the moral law.
And we're looking at the general equity of that because why?
Because it's based on the moral law.
Well, no, I don't mean that. So why would we have to look at the general equity of that law? It's because that's expired with the nation of Israel. That was their law. That was their application of the moral law.
Yes.
The principles that were part of that.
The specific laws are not binding on us.
So what you're telling me,
the general principle of the moral law is binding on us.
So what you're telling me, brother, is that you don't deny the tripart division of the law as our confession states.
Of course not.
So you hold to the fact that the moral law is universal. It applies to all.
Yes.
And then we talk about the judicial law that expired with the nation of Israel. And of course, the ceremonial law was fulfilled in Christ, and so it's unnecessary. But yet we look at all of that law, the case law, the different things, and we see in that principles, and you don't see those principles as being different from what the moral law is telling. They're just applications of the moral law.
Yeah.
Would that be true?
Say that again.
So you don't look at the judicial law and see some sort of a law or a principle in there that you don't actually see from the moral law itself. So like we talk about life or the protection of life.
Yeah.
We can look at the judicial laws and see specific things that they say in there, but we're not drawing that. We're drawing our understanding of what the judicial law actually from what the Ten Commandments say.
Exactly. So if it's making an application from the moral law, the sixth commandment, you shall not murder, and it's saying, well, this is how we're applying it or how you should apply it in your society in ancient Israel.
Yeah.
And we look at that and we say, oh, yes, so it is right to apply the thou shalt not murder to, you need to make sure your guests are safe.
Yeah.
Parapet around the roof.
Yeah.
So what we learn from that is that, I have a responsibility for those in my home.
Sure.
And that it comes from the Ten Commandments, that
right.
Life is valuable, therefore we should protect life.
Okay.
And the Westminster lays this out clearly when it's going through the Ten Commandments.
Sure. It gives you a very clear.
Yes, and that's what I'm arguing for, that our nation should be a Christian nation that formulates laws based off the Old Testament, based off the moral law.
Yeah, and so we're going to look at how Israel applied those things, and we're going to draw some principles from that. And
here's where I differ from theonomists, because I'm not differing from them. I think where most 1689ers are. Where I'm differing, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm differing from them
you're
because
wrong. I just don't know what it is yet.
I know exactly, most likely. So the moral law is based off of what? The nature of God, which we see in what? Creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is absolutely a place for basing laws off of what we see in nature. We don't have to have a verse for everything. And so where I'm going to differ from a theonomist is that I don't have to have a verse for me to say this is wrong. I would argue, and I would make you can make a biblical argument against polygamy, but I would also argue from nature against polygamy. I would argue that this is not how God made the world. I would do just like Paul does in Romans 1 and in Corinthians 11 when he points back to creation and says, look at how God made the world.
Okay.
He made the world this way, so we should function in this way.
Okay. I got a couple things to say, and I like to dig into this deeper. I want you to find that text that I sent you. I sent you 3 different questions, and I want to walk through those together if we can. So I just want to throw it out there that I think that immediately throwing this discussion into what would effectively be a tier 2 issue, meaning, so first tier this is what believers hold to, and if you don't hold to these, you're not a Christian. Tier 2 is, I still count you a believer, but we cannot be in fellowship together because we disagree this so strongly.
Yep.
And then third tier issues are things that we can disagree on and still be in the same fellowship and still have, friendly conversation,
sure,
go back and forth. So we have always thought of these issues of how God's law should be applied in society as we govern. We've always thought of that as being a third tier discussion. We can have different positions. We think about eschatology. You can be on mill, you can be post mill, or whatever. We can talk about, if you want to be
we have all 4 positions in our church.
Yeah, you want to be a theonomist, you want to be general equity theonomist, you want to be a Christian nationalist, you want to just hold to the confession in terms of how that's worded. We've always thought of that as a third tier issue, but never thought. The moment you say you're denying the confession, brother, then that becomes a dividing point. We can no longer be in fellowship together because we as a church, we're a 1689 church.
Yeah, you're making it a second tier issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So so in all of these discussions, I've never met anybody that's a theonomist that would deny the tripart division of the law, deny that when we talk about general equity, we're drawing it from the moral law and how that is applied in case law. We're not superimposing Israel's laws upon our nation or wanting to do that necessarily. I haven't known anybody that's wanted to do that. So that's why it's never been a big deal to me to even have this discussion. Yeah. Okay. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And if you got any comment on that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've never even seen someone show that Rushdoony denied the tripartite.
They've wanted to say that about it. Now, Rushdoony didn't care as much that they were saying that. Bahnsen did, and Bahnsen multiple times repudiated those things.
Yes.
And then, anyways.
So, that's part of my problem is that there's a lot of accusations get made about Rushdoony and Bahnsen. And I do not see them as the boogeyman that they're made out to be.
They can't be substantiated.
I think it's just a lot of it's ridiculous. Like you're attacking men, they're dead, they can't even defend themselves. And a lot of the argument reminds me of the whole federal vision thing, where it's like you find some little minutia. Well, when they said this, no, you don't understand.
That's a denial of justification by faith.
This is what they meant when they said it. I know they say that they believe in justification of faith, but then they mean this. And it just becomes ridiculous.
Yeah, that kind of...
but it's the same feel.
It does. That kind of scrutiny just is so bothersome to me.
Yes.
And so off-putting. I kind of tend to take those brothers and set them aside and not listen to them anymore. Yep. They've lost their voice when they over-analyze and over-scrutinize that kind of stuff.
It's the conspiracy theory.
All right, so that's that first thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is that the confessions that, Westminster 1689, our adaptation, our changes that we made to that, and the Savoy and those kind of things, they were not written in a pluralistic society. They were written at a time when there was this consensus of God in governing as God's agents in the world and having the luxury to write laws and think about these things. And so when you forward, let's just use 1689, when you forward that into our time frame, and we are in such a pluralistic society now where literally, today was the inauguration, and you've got a Jew up there praying.
They had a rabbi, man.
Had a rabbi up there. It was ridiculous. He even said that God trusts in America. I don't know if you heard that. I was like, oh my goodness.
No, I'll be honest. Yeah, when they said their rabbi was coming to pray, I was like, all right, kids.
Turn it off. Yeah.
Back to schoolwork.
But that is the society that we live in right now. And it's not just that. It's Islam. You got to have a Muslim. You got to have this. You got to think about
Hindus getting sworn in on demon books.
Yeah, you got J.D. Vance's wife is a Hindu, and J.D. I think he's a Catholic now. You just got all this stuff that's going on. A lot of people, I think yourself and others, have felt that the 1689 lacks the teeth to engage in a pluralistic society, and therefore they flirt with additional phraseology and maybe adding general equity theonomy, adding the word theonomy to it in order to give it the teeth to say we want to engage our culture and say we're Christians, we want a society that acknowledges that Christ is king and that this is the laws and these are the rules and these are the things that should happen.
Well, yeah.
That's where the hunger comes from the use of the word theonomy
100%.
and the idea of a Christian nation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So how small is the group that would understand what you mean if you say general equity? That is a niche. Like that is such a small group of people. And it's a pretty small group if you say theonomy, but it's more people are going to understand that you're talking about God's law. So when I say general equity theonomy, I'm making it clear what I'm talking about in my mind.
Yeah. So my argument to you, and the reason why I've not wanted to add theonomy, is because I think we can arrive at some of the same discussions
without the word,
without adding it.
Sure.
We just talk about we mean the general equity that our confession says, but then when you see how I apply that, how I think about those things, that's where it shows up, and that's where I felt like Christian nationalist was maybe a little bit better term because it's new.
Yeah.
And it doesn't carry the baggage of theonomy. Because theonomy, it's gone through the rigors and the people have debated it, and it's been castigated in a certain form and a certain thought. Some people are okay with that. And I've never been okay with that because, and this is another really frustrating thing, because people often, I even seen a book that's coming out recently where they conflate theonomy and reconstructionism as though they're just synonymous terms.
They're not.
And they're not synonymous terms. Because I would react against reconstructionism, and which does seek to apply the judicial laws and stuff like that
as if it's binding
in a one-to-one basis, and so that's problematic. But anyways, I just want to say those two things about this. One, this is a third-tier issue, not a second-tier issue, in my opinion, and secondly, it's the confessions were not written in the pluralistic society that we have right now. And so the appeal for these types of terms are for...
They weren't addressing that issue.
No.
And yet that is a big issue for us.
Yeah. It's a huge issue for us.
Yeah. The 1689ers couldn't have fathomed the idea of, allowing mosques to be built in your town and those kind of things. They could not have fathomed that.
No.
When they're arguing for religious liberty, they're arguing for it within the Christian religion.
So this is why, even though we're confessional and we hold to the 1689, we also feel like there have been times where it's been important for us as a church to define ourselves by other little subset confessions.
Sure.
So, our
1689 doesn't talk about gender stuff.
I mean, they would argue, and I would argue, yeah, sure it does, but it's not clear and articulate for our current.
They're not addressing the question about whether or not a man can be a woman.
Yeah, now I can interpret from it that this is what it's talking about.
Sure.
So this is why now we as a church have not signed this statement, but there's been a statement put out, the statement on Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Or what is that? What it's called? I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And that's like Dusty Devers and Webben and different men have contributed to that.
It's good.
I like it.
Jeff Wright,
I like that statement, and I'm pretty much okay with that. But we haven't adopted it as a church or anything like that.
I think I signed it, but we as a church haven't signed it.
No, yeah,
we haven't adopted it.
No. All right. So I sent you a text a week and a half ago or something. I want you to just read the first. Let's start in that. Let's go through the first one and the second one and the third one.
Okay. So first question, do you affirm the expiration of the judicial laws? The 1689 London Baptist Confession is clear that the judicial laws expired together with the state of that people. These laws given to Israel under the Old Covenant are no longer binding as written. However, their moral principles, their general equity, still have value today. If you believe the judicial laws themselves are binding, you've moved beyond the confession. So I would affirm the expiration of the judicial laws.
Right.
That they have exactly what the 1689 says. They have expired together with the state of that people, and other than the general equity of what they are showcasing about what the moral law teaches, that is a benefit. Okay. That's good. We should hang on to that. So I agree with that.
Those three questions I sent them to you because I think this is a better approach to determining confessionality, is by asking these three specific questions. And that was the first question, as opposed to assuming your position, saying this is what you believe, that you're denying this, you're extracting it from, it's just frustrating that way. People have written articles like that there's just always put people on the defensive, whereas it's just say, hey, brother, do you believe that the judicial laws have been abolished in the state of... Yeah.
And then what we're going to find out is that our disagreements are actually smaller than we think.
Really small. Yeah. We're just talking about how do we...
thoughtful
application.
As opposed to some 1689 churches that have accused us of being theonomic post-mill.
Yeah.
And we literally do not have a single elder that is theonomic post-mill.
Right.
None of us have ever been post-mill.
So they interpret what they do.
Ever.
Bro, what they interpret is political engagement and a desire for cultural change around us. First off, what's so frustrating, they see that and they go, well, you don't evangelize. Are you kidding me? Rep Church, through our ministries, distributed almost 100,000 tracts last year.
Yeah.
In 2024 alone.
Yep.
Okay.
100 grand.
That's amazing. And that's just, we equipped like 30 or 40 different churches.
We have a heart for evangelism.
Yeah, we go out 4 or 5 times a week. But anyways, the accusation is if you're involved in cultural engagement, you're a cultural warrior.
You're focused sitting in the right place.
You don't share the gospel. You don't believe. No. We actually totally believe that the gospel is the transformative agent in our world to change people.
Here's the issue. They literally have a presupposition about us. And so everything they see is interpreted through that lens.
Sure.
I want the gospel to go to the 4 corners of the earth.
That's our whole logo.
Exactly.
Where's that at? No, you don't have.
Where's
no, it's right here.
I don't have my
That's
hat.
the logo right there.
Exactly.
The gospel
Jerusalem,
to the 4 corners
Jerusalem
of the world.
cross.
Yeah.
But I also want justice on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the Psalms, if you read the Lord's Prayer, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If you just read the Bible, you will find that Christians should want justice on the earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
We should want that. And so it's insane to say that, well, you're worried, you're too worried about, the homosexuality, the LGBTQ agenda. You're too concerned about all this wickedness. You should just be preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
First of all, we are preaching the gospel.
Yep.
And second of all, it is right for me to want just laws.
Yeah.
And it's also right for me to want a Christian nation, city, state for my children to be blessed in. My grandchildren. I want my grandchildren to grow up in a city.
They're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not. In fact, they're go hand
to hand.
Hand in glove.
Hand in hand.
I want my grandchildren to grow up in a city where the city sign says Christ is Lord underneath the sign.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
I had a couple of tweets here 3 days ago. I posted this one. I said, why is this hard? Listen, Christ is Lord over all, including nations. Civil governments are God's servants, accountable to his moral law. Without God's truth, rulers cannot govern justly. Christians must proclaim Christ, shape culture, and call leaders to righteousness for his glory and the good of all. That was paragraph 1. Second, a Christian nation isn't coerced faith. It's a society with laws rooted in God's truth, protecting life, promoting peace, and upholding human dignity. Loving our neighbors compels us to labor for this, boldly speaking truth and praying for our leaders. Righteousness exalts a nation. This is the whole idea of love of neighbor. It's the love of my neighbor and everybody around me, my whole community, is why I want to elevate God's honor and honor him in the way that just laws and the way we have. Then my last paragraph was, Christ's lordship is not confined to private faith. That's pietism. It demands public obedience. Engage in civic life, proclaim the gospel, and seek justice. This isn't optional. The nations belong to Christ. Let's act with courage and conviction for his glory and their good.
Yep.
Why is that hard?
Well,
Why does somebody read that and go, oh, you're a theonomic post-mill and I just want to share the gospel with people?
Yeah, well, it's because you said it. Pietism is eating their brain.
Yeah.
It's the exact same reason that we want to say you can be a disciplined fat person. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Why do you always bring it to this in this? Man, it's just, yeah.
Or you could be a disciplined drunk. Sorry.
Yeah, that's better.
That's better. So the idea is that, but it's a joke because we would never say that. But it's the idea that you can separate. I'm, obviously not controlling myself in my life, and that's obvious to everybody. And yet, I can be spiritually disciplined. Mm-hmm. You're not being. And so in the same vein, if we want our neighbors to be Christian, we're not only going to share the gospel with them, but we're also going to promote God's law, which the scriptures say is a schoolmaster that drives us to God, that drives us to Christ. Yep. And so we are going to want just laws because we're not going to want babies murdered, and we're not going to want little children taught that sodomy is okay, and we're not going to want usury. And I mean, you could go all day. Yeah. We don't want injustice. We hate it because we love what's good.
Okay.
And that should be correct. Sorry. Okay.
No, you're good.
I'm off on the soapbox.
All right, let's go to the second question.
So the second question is, do you root general equity in the Decalogue and natural law? Yes.
Yep.
General equity doesn't introduce new moral principles. Instead, it applies truth already revealed in the moral law, summarized in the Ten Commandments and natural law, which God has made clear through creation and conscience. If you treat the judicial laws as the foundation of morality rather than as applications of timeless truths, you've misunderstood their role.
Yeah.
100% agree with that.
Okay. All right, last one. And I think this is where we need to flesh this out a little bit more.
Do you reject theocratic enforcement of judicial laws? Sounds scary. The judicial laws were designed for Israel's theocratic state and were never meant to be imposed directly on other nations. While their general equity provides timeless principles of justice, they aren't a blueprint for recreating Israel's theocracy. Confessionality requires recognizing this distinction. Yes. So I would reject theocratic enforcement of specific judicial laws. I would not reject, if you want, here's the issue. It will be called theocratic. Like if you want to ban abortion, you're going to be called a theocrat. You're going to be called that.
Yeah.
So we can't get away from it.
That's why we've been, in a joking way, like Dusty Devers.
Yeah.
He's been putting in laws out there that are putting forth legislation and trying to get it out of committee and get it into their.
He submitted like 25.
Yeah, and they're amazing. Like banning pornography and these are great things. And people call him, he's our theocratic leader.
Yeah.
Well. That's how it's
Christo-fascist.
Yeah, he's a Christo-fascist. These are jokes. Nobody thinks of this as a theocracy.
Yeah.
But the church's role is, you're the government. My role as a pastor is to teach you. God's word says.
Yes.
God says this about this issue.
Yes.
See this in society. See pornography. See how the devastation of this. You, as a magistrate, are called to legislate that and to punish evil and reward what is good.
Yep.
So I'm going to tell you that.
It's always been this way. So if you go back to Calvin's Institutes, who were they written to?
Magistrate.
The king.
Yeah. They
were written to the king. Literally, read the front of his Institutes. You go back to how many of so much of John Knox's writings were written to the queen or the king, or those that were in civil government. Well, all the way through to today, when we have a president, he always has certain religious people he meets with.
Yeah.
And it's watered down. It don't work anymore, but it should. It harkens back to the way it should be.
Yeah.
It's just because he's got knuckleheads like Paula White or whatever.
Yeah.
But the idea is there. You know what I'm saying? That he is getting counsel from those
He's
who
listening.
understand God's word.
Yes.
Because that's our moral authority,
Right.
is God's word.
Right.
This is why pluralistic societies do not work, and they cannot work, and they'll never work.
Who's going to counsel him?
Exactly.
Is the Satanist going to counsel him? In a pluralistic society, he should be allowed to have all of these different religions and all these different moral codes to be able to inform him. No. There is one God.
Yep.
And we need to submit to him.
Demon worshippers like Muslims and Jews and Hindus, their moral authority is going to come from a demonic ideology.
Yep.
That is always going to be opposed to Christian ideology.
Yep.
You cannot have a freedom of religion society where it's pluralistic.
Yeah.
Because those other religions will always be antagonistic towards Christianity. Always.
So you just hit on something. I think this is going to put us at odds with some of our 1689 brothers and Baptists. Let's go, but just Baptist history, because Baptists have historically lobbied for religious freedom. And what I think they're doing is they're mistaking denominational freedom, Christian freedom, and saying, well, religious freedoms means we should allow mosques to be. Russell Moore said that famously.
That's insane.
It's just the stupidest thing that false gods should be allowed to be worshipped in a state, and that the Christian leaders that are around there should allow that to happen, I think is absolutely absurd. So this gets into first table application of the moral law. What should that look like in society? As a pastor, I'm going to advocate for there's only one God.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say we should allow every other God to worship. Only one God.
Yep.
That's my position, and that I know that's going to put me at odds.
Well,
with different people.
but that was the founding of our country.
I agree.
So when we were founded as a nation, it was over 90% Protestant.
So religious freedom was not seen as, let's let the demon worship their demons.
9 of the 13 colonies had state churches.
Yep.
Okay. When the Declaration of Independence was ratified, 9 of the 13. So the idea that so in Virginia, the reason Kentucky is so Baptist because Baptists weren't allowed to preach without a license in Virginia because they were Anglican. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying I'm in favor of state churches, but obviously the founding of this country had the idea that a state could have a state church, and where they wouldn't even let a Baptist preach. Now, somewhere that's not going to let a Baptist preach would mock you into oblivion if you're talking about building mosques.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like there were times where their boats were offshore full of Jewish people, and we wouldn't let them offload because we were like, no, we don't want them here because we're a Christian nation.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this idea that mosques and synagogues, and that's what they meant by religious freedom, is literally insane.
Yeah.
Literally insane. That's not what the founders meant.
Yeah. I don't think it was. I don't want to be, as a Christian, as a minister, I don't want to be advocating for religious freedom that includes false worship.
Yeah.
And I think I have the support of the 1689 specifically on this issue.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to back down on that.
Yeah.
This is where I said this. I said, religious liberty safeguards the conscience, but does not legitimize the public worship of false gods.
Yes.
So I'm okay with a Muslim being a Muslim. I'm not.
Sure.
I can't convert you. I can't coerce you. I can't force you to do that. But I'm not going to allow you to go proselytize.
No.
In my community, this is a Christian area.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to be allowed to do that.
Yeah.
And I think the 16
because you're sending people to hell.
Right.
Yeah.
This is an eternal issue,
Yes.
not a not just a state
You're
issue.
promoting souls being damned to hell. Yeah.
So and I know that the context of this is the church, but I don't think the writers of the 1689 had a view outside that false worship would be allowed. So this is what I said. The 1689 Confession declares that God alone is to be worshipped as revealed in the scriptures, and idolatry remains a sin against his eternal moral law.
Yeah.
And that's chapter 22, paragraph 2.
Yep.
I don't think I can in good conscience support religious freedom from the way that it's being defined today.
Yeah.
I can, going back to this time frame, what religious freedom can allow you as a Quaker or you as a we're going to have.
I don't know that Quakers would have been included, but that's me. But
I just threw that out.
I would argue Trinitarian.
Yeah, I think, but this is where we get into, I think, as we form and we think about our laws, we need to be thoughtful about this. We certainly don't want to get into a situation where Presbyterians and Baptists are abusing one another
Sure.
or persecuting one another. But there should be a central theology, a statement of faith, or something like that. That we as a nation, these are the laws that we're gonna form based upon this.
Yes, because you have to. So all laws are based upon a moral statement of what is right and wrong, a moral principle.
Yeah.
They have to be.
Yeah.
Because the law states this is wrong, this is right.
Yeah.
Okay. That has to come from a moral foundation.
Yeah. So Romans 13 talks about he punishes the evildoer, and what's
Reward,
evil?
yeah,
It rewards
exactly.
the good. What's evil? What's
How
good?
do you know what's
How do you
good
know?
and evil?
You
Yeah.
only know through the Word of God,
Exactly.
or through a standard, whatever that standard is.
Yes.
And that's the Word of God.
So what do you do when a magistrate is promoting what's evil and punishing what is good?
Yeah.
You've got it upside down from what Romans 13 is talking about.
Yeah.
And so when you have, so like as you said, I'm not arguing that we should be going door to door and looking for Muslims. I'm arguing that no one but a confessing Trinitarian Christian could ever run for any type of office, including dog catcher. Nothing. You cannot be in any place of authority.
Yeah.
And
But that sounds like when you're denying the third question here, and I don't think we are. That's not a theocracy.
No.
That's just basing your laws off of what's right and wrong, what is good and evil. How do you know what is good and evil except through God's word? This is the standard.
I think we can see from nature that a society has to have conformity to a moral standard in order to be cohesive.
Yeah.
How can it be cohesive if everyone has a different idea of morality? Mm-hmm. Well, then I can murder you or I can beat my wife like Muslims do. And we as Christians are saying, no, you can't beat your wife. And they're like, yeah, well, the Quran says I can as long as my hand's open. And so at that point, what are we doing? We're pointing to a standard of morality.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not pointing to the judicial, Theocratic judicial standard of you see what I'm saying?
I do. This has already happened in America, where we've had such an influx of Muslims. They're invading our nation.
Yep.
They're setting up bases, and they're culturally,
Yep.
that's becoming this. They're running for magistrates in there. They're governing themselves within our society. And then you have things like honor killings. Well, honor killings go directly against God's
Part of their
moral
culture.
law.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can kill my daughter if she's, disobedient, or if she runs off with a young man, or whatever, these kind of things. And our laws don't allow for that.
Yep.
But we recognize that, adultery is wrong and those kind of things.
Well, for crying out loud, look how slavery got started in the U.S. So the first man to own a slave in the United States was Anthony Johnson, who came over on a boat as an indentured servant in 1622. And he came over here and he argued, because he was from Africa, he was a black man. He took the name Anthony Johnson. He wasn't born with that. But he took that name, and he argued that because his culture, slavery was legal, and we didn't have, the laws were pretty loose here in the colonies at that point in the early 1600s. And so he argued before a judge that in his culture, slavery was legal. So he should be allowed to own another man. It's the first slave ever owned in America. And so we made the mistake of allowing a wicked culture to start something in our land that became a travesty and absolute, just something that was horrible.
Yeah.
But we allowed that by holding him to the standard of a wicked culture.
Yep.
And so then we got slavery.
All right. I think I want to come back to this. I want to hit this harder. I've been on the episode that I did with Austin. We were talking about witchcraft.
Yeah.
We were talking about because I believe that the death penalty should be on the table for first table violations at a certain point. But again,
Sure.
I think there's a thoughtfulness to that. It's not like, not like Israel, you're caught as a witch and you're going to die or something like that.
Yeah, so I liked what someone like Uganda, a place like Uganda. So when they look at homosexuality, it's not homosexuality across the board that is you get the death penalty. It's aggravated homosexuality.
Yeah.
So someone that's raping.
Yeah, you're sodomizing.
A repeat offender.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. At some point, they meet the standard
It's a thoughtful-
of aggravated. Yes. It's like first degree versus second
It's a
degree.
Christian nation
Yes.
with a thoughtful law against homosexuality and
Yes.
sodomy.
Yep.
So, and there's other aspects of that. You're not gonna, if you're a sodomite, you're not gonna do this.
Yes.
You're not gonna be allowed to do this. All right, I want to revisit that topic.
Sure.
We've already talked a long time about this.
Yeah.
You've been okay with general equity theonomy as a phraseology. I've never been okay. Now you're backing off of it because you don't like theonomists that run with it. And I think we're both feeling the same way about abolitionists.
Yeah.
I love my abolitionist brothers, but they just act retarded sometimes.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. Yeah.
I'm not totally, so maybe
I'm still an abolitionist.
Maybe I'm in the same place in the standpoint of like, I don't really mind the term, but I'm not going around calling myself that.
Yeah.
I prefer Christian nationalism.
Yeah. And again, that evokes a different response from brothers that I love and care about. They're going to go, oh, you're a Christian nationalist. I got to be against that too.
Yeah.
And anyways, I guess I'm okay with that. But anyways, hear us. This is not a second tier issue.
Yeah.
You've just proved, in my opinion, by answering yes to all three of those questions, that you are confessional. And I agree with those statements. I consider myself confessional. Outside input into my life and my understanding, people would say, yeah, you're confessional.
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about this because we live in a pluralistic society. We need to have hard discussions about this kind of topic.
And I don't know that we should let Greg Bahnsen own the word theonomy. I mean, there's so few people that know who he is anyway. It's like, I don't know. But I don't really care.
So we have an anonymous form at snakeonthetable.com at the bottom. You scroll all the way to the bottom. So if you have a question about this, maybe you're somebody who really wants to interact on this topic, I would encourage you to fill out that. I won't know who you are unless you sign your name on that. And we'd love to bring it on. I'd like to talk more and more and more about this particular topic. And this is what we do in this room. This is the Hall of Fire here. And we'll hammer all this kind of stuff out and call each other names and whatever. And this is how we handle it here. And we still worship Christ together every Sunday morning. We love going.
We argue like men.
Exactly. All right. Thanks for joining in.
Snake on the Table. God bless.